This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting show, and I've got a real treat for you. I had a chance to meet this gentleman when I was doing a comedy roundtable. He, Bob Duback, and Jamie Alcroft, all good comedy people, met with me, and we had a fun comedy roundtable where we shared some information. But it was at that time I met this guy. He is the manager to the Comedy Stars. He has his own company, Hassman Entertainment, and I love the intro of his company. It's called a personal management joint. So he takes himself very seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil Hassman.
Hey, how are you, Scott?
Wow. I'm so glad we could finally get together and do this. You were so interesting on the round table, and you bring a whole different dynamic to the conversation about being a comic and the nuances of show business. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
We've got
it's different for it's really funny because my business has evolved from just comedians to actors and writers and blah, blah, blah. But there's no question, comics are really, representing comics is a unique skill set, believe me.
Yeah, it is really, I've done a lot of discussion about even all the variety arts, but even talking about musicians and actors. Stand-up comics really have a whole different challenge, not only each and every show, because the audience has changed, the situations change, the settings change. You know, a lot of actors or musicians, it's the same thing, or they get a chance to rehearse over and over and over, and comics are just kind of thrown up in front of the beast, the audience, and are, you know, so, okay, you know, dance, idiot, dance, you know.
And it's the road warriors that learn how to do it right. The guys who really go out and work the road at the beginning and understand that not every crowd is going to be the same. Not every crowd's going to laugh at the same joke. Every city you go to is going to react to you differently. And the guys who survive that, they tend to have long careers.
Yeah, we found that true in many situations, and getting a chance to interview a lot of professional entertainers through this podcast has brought that up. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, Neil, if you don't mind. Being a manager, in fact, we joked about it during the roundtable versus an agent, but I don't know how somebody ends up being an entertainment manager. How did that progress for you when you were younger? You know, last year.
Yeah, last year, right. In my youth, I was actually a working musician until I was 30.
Oh.
And I toured, I sang backup, played bass, played keyboards in a bunch of pretty well-known bands. And just by the time I was in my late 20s, I didn't want to be on the road anymore. It was really bad news. And that was that era when everybody was high all the time and Coke was the biggest thing going. And I didn't like it. It just changed everybody's perception of the music business. And the music business got really slimy. And I had been really good friends through the 70s, through my 20s, with a very well-known guy in New York named Kenny Kramer, who was a friend of mine from New York, and the original Kramer, who became Cosmo Kramer in Seinfeld. And Kenny actually still lives in that hallway in the same apartment.
Wow.
But, and through Kenny, I met a whole lot of comedians, the Funny Boys, Jim Vallely, John Schmock, Mendoza, Larry David, Jerry, all those guys. So I kind of knew them all through Kenny, but I'd never really thought about doing anything in any business other than music. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I realized I wasn't going to be the star. I was always going to be the backup guy. And music just did not hit it for me anymore. My older daughter had been born. I hadn't seen her very much. And I mentioned to Kenny one day that, you know, I was looking to find something else to do, hopefully stay in the entertainment industry, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, you know, the Funny Boys are out in California now. And I'd spent some time in California working with a couple of different musicians. And I really liked LA. Great place to live at the time, late 70s, early 80s. Everything was happening here. And Kenny said, look, you know these guys. Why don't you give so-and-so a call and see if they're looking for help? And the Funny Boys were working with a management company at the time called FBMI, which was, it depended on who you asked. If you asked either John or Jim, FBMI was Funny Boy Management Incorporated. But if you asked the four girls who owned the company, it was Four Blonde Management Incorporated. But they basically had the Funny Boys, Rich Scheidner, Carol Leifer, a whole bunch of really, really great, incredible people who I knew most of them from New York and had seen them all perform. They'd either opened for bands I was working with or whatever. And so I contacted the girls who were running FBMI, and I told them, look, I'm set. I can afford to be an intern for a few months to learn the business, but it sounds like something I'd really like to get into. And within a week, I was literally off the road as a musician and living in California, interning at FBMI.
Wow.
And I learned early on that the difference in California, at the time, I should start by saying, at the time in California in the 80s, there was a law on the books called the Talent Agency Act, TAA. And that regulated how agents could work. And it basically kind of almost outlawed management, something that was not sanctioned by the state, something where the state couldn't come in and grab some of your money. And the rules and regulations on agency were quite different from the rules of management. And these girls and a few other people were bucking the trend because comedians needed more than what the TAA was giving them in protection, I guess is the best way to put it. So again, I went to work for FBMI and I realized management was where I wanted to be because as a manager, I could produce, I could co-write, I could tour, I could book tours, I could do things that agents were not allowed to do. And managers made 5% more. Standard money for managers is 15, and for agents 10. And when you asked that question at the roundtable that we did the first time, I think you said to me, "What's the difference between management and agency?" And I said 5%.
Well, and that was a great response, and the fact
and it appealed to that 5% appealed to me because agents do a ridiculous amount of work and lived under these incredible. There is no Talent Agency Act anymore. That went by the wayside 8-10 years ago, and there was no balls in LA to bring it back. Agents liked being able to do more things than they'd been restricted to. A lot of agents and a lot of agencies, CAA went into producing, for instance. CAA signed a contract with Coca-Cola 5 minutes after the Talent Agency Act went expired. CAA, Ovitz had signed a contract with Coca-Cola to produce their commercials, to represent them in the market, to place their product on TV shows. They basically, CAA broke the floodgates wide open when the TAA went under. And kind of made it so that agencies now could do a lot of things that they couldn't do, and a lot of things that managers could do. And in the 8 to 10 years since that's gone south, a lot of agencies have merged. The agency business in LA especially has gotten very, very small and very, I'd say it's boutique, but some of the agencies are huge. But it's a very small business because a great number of agents are now managers. They took a lot of their clients, they went off and they said, look, it's much easier to work as a manager. And now managers are recognized because, again, there is no TAA anymore restricting studios and casting companies from saying, oh, no, I'm sorry, this deal has to go through a licensed agent. That's not the case anymore. So it changed a lot of things, and I just it was dumb luck that I found management instead of agenting.
Wow. Well, and you kind of created your own success by really doing what I've told a lot of other entrepreneurs. If there's something you're interested in doing, go talk to the people doing it, ask about it, learn from them. You created that opportunity for you to get into the career.
That 3 or 4 months at FBMI, the girls were smart, but it was new. Comedy was new at the time. Getting people shows and sitcoms and stuff, it had always come from the writer's room or from the producer's idea or from the studio's idea for somebody that they had under contract. And then when the Improv and Comedy Store and Laugh Factory and all these clubs all over the country were making money, doing great, had all these headliners that were making a name for themselves, the network said, wow, what an opportunity this is for us. And in the late 70s, started signing comics to deals for shows built around what their comedy was. And that was new. They'd never done that before. The only thing that had ever been even close to that was the Lucy Show, believe it or not. You know, the original Lucy Show with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz was the first real situation comedy. And they built that around their strengths. And then that didn't happen for years and years and years. And then all these comics who were making names for themselves and had actually really great routine that shows could be built around started getting deals. And so management and agency for comedians became a very big field in LA in the early 80s. And again, for me, it was just dumb luck that I walked into a company that had 10 people that went on to huge writing and acting and sitcom success. And so that was a perfect place to intern, and it was the perfect opportunity for me. And I only did it for 3 or 4 months because I took right to it. It was something that I felt my entire time as a musician, I'd been writing my own contracts. In fact, for a lot of the other guys who I worked regular backup gigs with, I was doing their contracts too, just because I grew up in a business environment and learned how to read a contract from my father. So it was a natural progression for me, and I loved it. And within 6 months, I had 10, 15 clients of my own. And most of them were stand-ups based at either the Improv or the Laugh Factory or the Comedy Store. So it was great. It was local for me. It was, it was great.
It was really an exciting time. I was on the other end of the show business spectrum as a producer of local clubs here in Sacramento, far out of LA, what I always called the fringe of show business. But the early 80s were really an exciting time. And to give the audience an idea of what you were talking about, when comics material were easily turned into sitcoms, the two biggest I think of is Jerry Seinfeld with the Seinfeld Show, and of course Ray Romano with Everybody Loves Raymond, were two shows really based on those guys' material and who they were, as opposed to somebody hiring an actor and fitting him into a story. The story came from the comics. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's exactly. And it took off. And, it's funny. The turnaround for it was the first time a comic did a fall show was Ellen. And that caused blowback, believe it or not. Ellen got signed to do a show. Everybody in the industry knew Ellen was gay. Everybody in the comedy industry, everybody at the clubs. When she did stand-up, she never hid the fact that she was gay. But the network made her straight when they gave her a show. And it backfired. It backfired badly because for a few years after she came out, and the advertisers and a lot of people at the network turned against her, it made it really difficult for other comics who had really great show-based comedy to get a gig. And it did. It took, a little bit more than 5 years for people to start coming back into that kind of thing. And we're seeing it again now. There just has been in the last few months, I guarantee next year at this time, you're going to see a ton of commercials for shows built around comedians and their personas. They're doing it again right now. There's been a big signing spree.
Well, that'll be exciting to see, because I think comedy has been affected by both COVID and the shutdown, but also this new woke society where everyone's being ultra sensitive and judgy. It is a difficult time for stand-up comedy, kind of the last bastion of free speech. So I hope you're right and we get a chance to see that. Let's go back a little bit. You're sharing some amazing information, Neil. Thank you so much. At what point do you feel a stand-up comic or any entertainer needs to consider getting a manager? I worked a lot with people that were doing open mics and would start emceeing and maybe get an opening spot. as a professional, when did you go to a comic and say, look, it's too early for you, or hey, you need a manager?
A lot of it depends on the person. There are a lot of people who back at the beginning, back in the early, I'll take it back. In the early 80s, everybody needed a place to go because there had been no place for them to go before. So everybody needed some direction. I got very lucky. Again, I got in with a management company my first few months of learning how to do it and beefing up my Rolodex. There's a flashback with names of people that I was dealing with, because at that time, everybody in the world was after the Funny Boys to do a show. In the early 80s, Jim Vallely and John Schmock, the Funny Boys, were the hottest comedy team going. They were Stiller and Mira for our generation. They worked everywhere. They headlined clubs across the country. And Brandon Tartikoff had seen them early on at the Improv and wanted to do business with them. And so the girl, that was what made FBMI, the Funny Boys. And then they had a lineup. I mean, Carol Leifer is still one of the greatest comedians, writers in the business to this day. She's on Hacks. She's on Hacks this season. Carol was married to Rich Scheidner in those days. And both of them, Scheidner and Leifer, are both still big name working comedies and comedy writers now. So, it depended on the person. A lot of the people with FBMI back then, they needed the guidance. They needed to be told, oh, you need a couple more months on the road or this or that. It depends on how driven they are, how smart they are. Everybody needs, especially if you're going to base yourself out of LA/Hollywood. I hate to use the word Hollywood because it's really a misnomer. But if you're based in LA, everybody needs the guidance. From the first open mic night where somebody sees you, if they think you're good, and I did this a lot. From 80 to 85, I went to every open mic I could. I went up and judged comedy competitions at the Holy City Zoo, in the name of I was up there as the improv manager guy. And I discovered two people up at Holy City Zoo performing, one of whom went on to be phenomenally successful at something that wasn't necessarily stand-up comedy. Everybody needs guidance. And now it's just as important because every agency now, every management company now has people watching YouTube, TikTok. They have people whose sole job all day long is to watch all the new stuff that's on YouTube, TikTok, all the other little streaming services to quote unquote discover people.
Wow.
And to me, that's the new open mic.
Right. It's
Honestly.
Interesting how that's so great that you mentioned that, because I'm an older guy and been in the business a long time. And I come from the, hey, go up, do a showcase, give me your best 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then we'll talk. Because I did this so long, I could see somebody for as few as 3 to 5 minutes and know what they had, what they were missing, or if they even had a shot. And that's the way it was done back in the 80s and 90s. But now social media has become, as you said, such powerful platforms that talent's being discovered all the time. It's a changing world, but the job is still the same. You still have to have an eye for talent.
The job is exactly the same. And if you hit something perfect. I got after about let's be generous and say after a year of going to open mics, and I knew in the first minute if somebody had the material to back up that 3 minutes, had the potential to have the material to back up that 3 minutes. And I was right a lot. It was dumb luck, but I was right a lot. And a lot of the guys, like for instance, I went up to the Holy City Zoo to judge a competition in, I think it was late 80, early 81, and saw a guy named Joe Alasky. And Joe went on to be the greatest voice dubber in the business. He died a few years ago, unfortunately, very sadly. But I saw Joe do a routine at the Holy City Zoo and knew in the first 3 minutes this guy was going to be humongous. Because he did his routine back then was his first bit was he would do Barney, he would do imitations of him in other people's jobs. And you got to know, Joe was 6'2", couple of 100 pounds, at least 70 pounds overweight at the early part of his career. And when he got up on stage and silently, his first 20 seconds was an impression of Barney Fife. And you knew he was doing Barney Fife. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, that's
and
talent.
He'd do this whole routine as like weird character actors as Frankenstein and just the juxtaposition of the wrong person in the wrong Arnold Schwarzenegger as Tweety Bird, just stuff like that. And you just knew that the guy could do it for hours. You could throw a name at him and he'd put it in somewhere. But what I saw in the guy was a voice talent that was beyond reproach. He could do somebody's voice after hearing it for 5 minutes, and you couldn't tell the difference. And I'll give you, one of the best stories about Joe was we finally started getting people to see him and recognize what his talents really were. And Roger Rabbit was casting, and Mel was sick, and they knew that they could go to Mel's son, Noel. Noel was a very moderate, I'm going to be very generous. Noel was moderately good at doing his father's voices. Noel did an Oldsmobile commercial, sitting in the back of an Oldsmobile with all of his father's characters sitting around him in the back seat. And that was supposed to be, Noel sought that. Noel had his people seek out a commercial like that so that he could be put into position to take over for his father, who was sick and on his way out and couldn't do voice work anymore. Well, when they got to casting Roger Rabbit, we petitioned. Gene McCurdy was the voice person at Warner Brothers at the time. And we said, look, you can't just hire the guy's son. That's absolutely not right. There are other guys out there. Jeff Bergen in New York, a phenomenal Mel Blanc could do Bugs perfectly. In fact, Jeff wound up getting Bugs. But Joe could do all of Mel's voices. And so I convinced Gene McCurdy to do a blind. And they had 16 people submit numbered reels to them, blind. And they had a panel of people at Warner Brothers who judged it. Joe was number one on everyone's list.
Awesome.
Joe was number 13. I still remember that. Joe was number 13. And he was number one on everyone's list. And so he got the gig doing most of Mel's voices in Roger Rabbit. And from that point on, he got taken a lot more seriously. He got Casper after that. He did the voices, a bunch of voices in Casper for Spielberg. Then Spielberg put up Tiny Toon Adventures, and Joe wound up doing all of Mel's voices as the younger characters in Tiny Toons, or most of them. Jeff Bergen did a couple. He did Bugs and a few of the other ones. But that was part of knowing what a guy had the potential to do, or seeing it. Like you say, if you see enough people after a few minutes, you know if the guy's got it or not. Joe was one of those guys. John Rourke was another one of those guys, also a voice guy. And I wound up putting John and Joe together on the Croft brothers' first political show, DC Follies. John and Joe, my two clients, wound up doing all the voices on DC Follies. But when you see somebody, you know if they're going to have the potential to go out there and do an hour set. I mean, that's the manna from heaven, is the getting booked to do an hour set, getting an HBO special, or even at the time a young comedian special. And a lot of those guys could do 3 to 5 minutes and couldn't do anything more than that. And they faded very fast.
Yeah.
So that was the job. The job was knowing who could fulfill the need of a comedy club to put somebody up for 45 minutes who could then get Carson or get the nighttime bookings. And, Jim McCauley, who booked Carson at the time, he had that same kind of job. He had to see that somebody could deliver in 3 minutes what they could then go out and build on. Because Carson didn't put one-time wonders on his show very often.
No, I
rambled.
No. I'm going to go back and kind of clean up some of it. Great information, though, and great vision of what was going on in sharing that with my audience. So thank you, Neil. And no, you're welcome to ramble on. I want to go back and touch on a couple things for the audience edification. First off, the Funny Boys were a terrific act, and I think unbeknownst to you and I, we crossed paths a few times because I had the Funny Boys in concert opening up for Jay Leno once. And there was a lot of the acts that you were working with at the time that worked my club, including Carol Leifer and Ellen and a number of others. But also I wanted to educate some of the younger listeners. Go to the Googler, look up Mel Blanc. In the 60s and 70s especially, he was the voice that did everything on Warner Brothers cartoons and a lot of other stuff. And Mel Blanc is a legend in voiceover work. And his son was filling in and doing some of that stuff after the fact. But I think it's great that as a manager, you made the case to the studio that you can't just assume someone's going to be good because of their heredity, or whatever, their lifeline, and giving these other people that had talents an opportunity to fill in the amazing large shoes of Mel Blanc. And that's a great story. And I'm so glad you did that. As a talent manager, what would you say was kind of the greatest joy? I mean, to give you an example, as a club producer, if I spotted a talent, the most recent might have been I gave Brian Posehn some early stage time, worked with him a lot when he was young and just getting started. And of course, he ended up being a great success as one of the semi-regular characters on Big Bang Theory. So that gave me a lot of joy that I was able to spot that talent, help nurture that talent, and it ended up going somewhere. For you as a manager and working with so many amazing talents, what brought you joy as a manager? What part of the job really, was fun for you?
Funny, I love Brian Posehn. He's just so off the wall. I mean, he's perfect character actor.
Oh,
which
yeah.
is, if you know, a lot of comedians make great character actors. It's one thing about comedy, you don't have to be pretty. And so a lot of guys, Brian's a perfect example of it. He started getting breaks on Big Bang, and he works all the time. My greatest joy, God, there's a lot of them, with Devon McDonald. I don't know if you know who Devon is. Devon was my client until 3 years ago for about 10 years. And Devon is the big black guy who was the bartender in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Mm-hmm. That's probably how most people know Devon, because that movie is still on at least once a day on some network. But Devon, extremely funny guy. He didn't start as a stand-up. He just had this innate sense of funny. Plus, he was huge. He's 6'7", 6'8", 300 plus pounds. Just a huge guy and the sweetest, nicest guy in the world. And getting him a string of movies from My Bodyguard through Forgetting Sarah Marshall, through having people see him, I saw Devon. Devon always wanted that for himself, but never really believed that he could achieve that. And I saw him in a little showcase. And he had been with an agent who I'd shared a couple of clients with. And I knew that the agent, he told me in advance, he had about 3 months left. His company was going to go under, and a couple of the agents were going to go with other places, and he was going to leave the business. He'd had it. So I signed Devon knowing that I'd wind up having him solo, and I wouldn't have to share him with an agency. And once I got that, I got auditions for him just by working the phones, calling people and going, look, this guy, people sell him short, yada, yada. Anyway, Sarah Marshall broke him out. And I fought to get him that movie. They had 3 other people in mind for that. And finally, the 3rd or 4th time he went back in, I got a call from the casting director saying, okay, your guy's got a pin in him. He's got a couple of days' work. He wound up working the whole movie. They liked him so much, they wrote scenes for him while he was in Hawaii. So that was one of my big things.
Yeah.
My other one is not a comedy thing, but it was a really great moment for me personally. Ryan O'Neal had gone for quite a few years without getting work. I had coffee every morning with this regular group of guys at a little coffee shop in Brentwood. I dropped my kid off at school. I'd go have coffee. Ryan was one of the guys in the group. Never really thought about even talking to him about representation. one day I happened to hear that they were looking for Bones' father on Bones. And I thought Ryan would be perfect. So I mentioned something to him at breakfast. So he said, okay, look, I have a reputation. You know my reputation. You're in the business. I've been having a lot of problems getting to work. My agent hasn't been able to do shit for me. You want to make a couple of phone calls? We had a handshake agreement. It happened to coincide with when Farrah got her terminal diagnosis. So the whole thing took about 6 weeks to do, but making Ryan his deal to be Bones' father on Bones was, to me, one of my great. First of all, I got a guy who couldn't get work because his reputation was really brutally bad. When he was young, he was real difficult. He was mellowing tremendously. He was perfect for the role. And I set a record because it was right. This is really funny, too. I don't know if I should say this publicly. But in the middle of negotiating, I suggested him. I went through the casting directors. I went through talent at Fox. I went through the whole thing. They made an offer. And that afternoon that they made the offer, Farrah got her terminal diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
And Ryan called me and said, I can't work. I can't take any work. I can't do this. You have to pass. So I called and I passed. The next morning, I got a call from Farrah. What the fuck are you doing? Excuse me?
By the way, he's talking about Farrah Fawcett, everybody.
Farrah Fawcett.
Famous actress.
Okay, leading up to that, we'd had a couple of lunches as I got to know Ryan and stuff. Ryan and his best friend Charlie, who was also one of my best friends, who I got invited into this coffee group with. We had a couple of lunches, and I got to know Farrah a little bit too. She was one of the nicest people I ever met. But Farrah calls me the next morning and goes, "What the fuck are you doing?" That's what. I want him to work. I don't want it to be when I die, he regrets not taking what might be the best job of his later life. Well, you got to talk him into that, Farrah. I tried yesterday. I told him this. I told him you're going to miss out on a great job. I don't think Farrah would want you to do it, blah, blah, blah. A couple hours later, I got a call from Ryan. I got read the riot act, make the deal.
Well, I'm going to bring that great story down to the synopsis that your greatest joy is taking on a project, kind of a personal project, and seeing it through to its success, right?
My favorite thing in the world to do is, it's not getting credit for myself. I don't care if I get called the comedy manager to the stars or if nobody knows my name. In fact, most people don't know my name, and I'm thrilled with that. That may change after this podcast, but the fact that I can take a guy who's either new in the business or struggling or whatever, go in and make a deal for somebody that I would be happy making for one of I've always considered my management clients family. I would never, ever represent anyone who I wouldn't have over to Sunday dinner at my house. That's honestly the way I've always decided on taking clients. And so when I make a deal for somebody like the deal for Ryan at Fox or the deal for Joe on Tiny Toons or the first deal, the Roger Rabbit deal, we celebrated for 2 weeks after I made that deal. That's my favorite thing in the world is taking somebody who really didn't think they could achieve what they dreamed of and making it happen. I love that. I get the biggest charge out of doing it for other people. I don't give a damn because the rewards come from me after I do that.
Right.
So I don't go into it. I don't go into it looking at what the reward for me is going to be because to me that's really genuinely secondary. And one of the things we talked about last time too was one of the reasons I really love this business is I have never had 2 days the same. I've been doing this since January 2nd, 1980. That's the day I officially left music and went into management. And I've never had 2 days that were the same. I don't know anybody with a job they can say that about. And I'd say 80 to 85% of it's been fun.
I think both those points are so important for a successful life. We're both older gentlemen and looking back and feeling that sense of success and taking some project and following it all the way through. And they don't always succeed, but that's part of the excitement, I think. but also the fact that you looked at people as family and were personally engaged is one of the reasons you've been so successful, because a lot of people see talent, whether it's musicians, actors, or comics, is just this week's meat, right? But people like you and I build relationships. We care about what happens, and I think that helps turn into success. Now, those are great examples of the good times, but I, as an entrepreneur and a producer, know that there's lots of things that kind of blow up in my face. As a manager of talent, what are some of the difficult aspects of the job?
Having to cover your clients' asses when they do something wrong. That's something I do. Listen, I'll give you the best one. And again, I mean, it's a tough one, but it's the most difficult week of my life, bar none, my professional life, I should say. I forgot the year, but it was the year that Prince was playing the Super Bowl. I planned the Super Bowl party at my house. I had 35 people invited to come over. I had RSVPs from 30 of them, which if you know the comedy people, you know that that's rare, that people will say, yes, I'll be there. Had that all planned out. 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:15, I get a call from a newspaper, The Guardian in England. We'd like to comment on what happened with your client this morning. Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. Have you not heard? Ryan, that was the morning that Ryan took a shot at his kid in his beach house.
Oh, geez.
Now, I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but let me tell you, 3 days, 72 hours, I did not sleep. My phone rang. Needless to say, I didn't have my Super Bowl party. I didn't even get to watch it. Thank God I had a VHS back in those days so I could rewatch it myself like a week later. But I had, for a week, my phone rang 24/7. I did Good Morning America, the Today Show. I did Entertainment Tonight. They were literally waiting outside my front door for me. I couldn't leave the house without giving a comment. Ryan was huge at the time, and he had just gotten this incredible gig back on Bones, and everybody wanted a story about Ryan O'Neal, and here he was reverting to some of his old behavior patterns.
Yeah, drinking, drugs, kind of bad behavior.
Well, listen, I'm not going to comment on what was behind it. I know the real story of what was behind it.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, well, and it might be a correct assumption, and you wouldn't be 100% wrong. But look, the whole thing that went down was, according to Redmond, his son, the whole thing was blown way out of proportion by the sheriffs. One of the neighbors heard the shot, called the police, and Ryan got arrested that morning. And for a week, that's all I could deal with. That was probably the worst business week of my life. It was brutal. And I took a hit. I took a hit for that.
But I think what's interesting, though, about the background of this story is, and I want to share it with the audience, is that when you take on the role as a manager of a talent, which is far more personal than an agent, you are, in essence, their babysitter, their guide, their mentor. When you're a manager of any type of talent, you become an important part of their life and are attached. So when Ryan O'Neal gets caught up in this over-dramatized situation, it falls on the manager to deal with what comes out of that, right?
Yeah, I had to basically run interference. Look, most celebrities don't keep their numbers listed. I kind of had to, because I wanted people to be able to contact me about my lesser-known clients just by Googling my name, or not even Googling back in those days, looking me up in the phone book. And so my number was available. My address was available. And honestly, that was part of the job. I saw it as part of the job. I still see it as part of the job to this day. If a client has an issue, I prefer that if they get a phone call direct, they refer it to me. I'll handle it for you. Don't worry about it. it's part of it. And look, it's like I said, I considered all my clients family. I like to make things as easy as I can for the people around me. And if that means taking the heat off you so you don't have a million, unfortunately, everybody knew where Ryan lived because he had a house on Coast Highway in Malibu. And he wasn't secret about it. He would come and go from the house, wave to people, and yada, yada. So he had a lot of people outside across Pacific Coast Highway from his house was a little strip mall. That strip mall was filled with satellite trucks and stuff
I could only imagine.
For 2 weeks after that, they were literally directing traffic on Coast Highway because of it. So, and he couldn't leave the house. I mean, we had to have food delivered and tossed over the wall, and it was pretty brutal.
Wow.
So that was about the worst thing that's happened to me in the industry. And then I've had a lot of contracts that got right to the day we were supposed to go in to sign them. A couple of really big ones, actually. And then we'd get a phone call as we were going out to the car. Hey, this is being put on hold. No explanation, no nothing.
Yeah, that's the
worst.
worst.
Those are bad moments.
Yeah, as a producer.
Those are bad moments, too. When you don't know why. That's what makes it bad.
Yeah, I can relate to that as a producer where you've worked on something for weeks or months and it comes down to finally sealing the deal. Or as a salesman, you work on a contract and then at the last minute it blows up and you have no idea why. It is so frustrating and depressing because you've put all this energy into it. But those are things that are balanced by the successes you've had, of course, and you've already shared how the joy of your job was taking on a project or an individual and taking their life and their career in the right direction. So the situation with Ryan O'Neal is not a one-off, but anything in life is a balance. That's the whole yin-yang thing. And so you have had that opportunity to deal with some tragic situations, manage them. That's where the term comes from. And you take that responsibility to help your friend, your talent, your client through the difficult times, just as you help them through the good times and help create the good times. I think that's really nails down the job of a manager and what you've accomplished in your career. And I know later on you branched off, you started doing a little producer work, you were doing other things. Was that an easy transition, something that you aspired to do, or just kind of fell in your lap?
Nah, I produced a couple of, actually, when my two older kids, my daughters were still kind of young, I had an opportunity to produce some Mother Goose videos with a bunch of Hollywood celebrities.
Oh, cool.
Doing
those.
Doing Shelley Duvall wound up being we filmed a whole bunch of them before they had a concept or it was one of the first cable, I think it was HBO, and it was one of the first cable shows that actually got made specifically for cable. However, it wound up being released because they made no money off it on HBO. It didn't attract a lot of viewers or anything, so it wound up getting packaged as a bunch of VHS tapes. But yeah, we brought in unbelievable amount of people. Because of my comedy contacts, I was able to get a lot of talent to come in and do these incredible satirical, half satirical. We had to keep them close to the stories so that kids could actually watch them, but so that the adults could watch them too and get a good chuckle out of everything. That's how they were done.
Oh, I remember.
And that was fun.
That
fell in my lap only because of what my experience was. I had been literally living comedy 24/7 for about 12, 13 years at that point.
Yeah, I remember those, and they were a lot of fun. And people have to remember, this is going back 30 years or so. HBO was new. It was really adult oriented. It wasn't where you would send your children to sit down and watch. And so coming out with a children's series, it's no surprise it ended up on video, and back then VHS. But it was a terrifically creative project. And the fact that you were behind that, as with dealing with other talent, you took on a project and you took something from nothing to a successful project. And then again, that's where your joy of your career comes in. So not just as a manager or mentor to a talent, now as a producer, you had an idea and you were able to take it to fruition. I mean, that's exciting.
Yeah, the other thing I really liked because of all my contacts and stuff, about 15 years ago, I did a series of shows, fundraisers basically, here in and around LA for an anti-domestic violence group. We raised a lot of money. Mo Collins, Deb, the girls from Mad TV headlined a few of them for me. It was really a good thing. I enjoyed producing the live shows a lot too. That was a lot of fun and enormous. I admire you guys that do it on a regular basis because so much work goes into putting up one night of good comedy. I can't imagine doing it full time.
Well, I think that a lot of people, much like other aspects of show business, don't really know what a director or a producer does. It's not just sitting in the fancy chair and pointing things out. It's being able to think about everything, every big or small aspect of a production that's going to happen, and the audience is unaware. I saw a show just Saturday night where immediately I spotted 10 or 15 things that the producers of that show didn't have set correctly. The audience still had a great time. I just think their experience would have been enhanced if a experienced producer had been behind it. But you're right. It's the nuances of that type of work, much like being a manager. I mean, I've not managed talent, and I'm sure there's aspects to that job that I would not be aware of because I haven't done it. You've kind of done it all. That's made a very fulfilled career. Congratulations.
You know, a lot of it comes from the fact that I started as a musician when I was 12. And so basically, even though I had a bunch of side jobs and stuff when I wasn't making money as a musician during my teens and 20s, I basically made my living in the arts, and my family was supportive of it. And, you know, most of my brothers have talents, musical, or one of my brothers, Andy Wayne was his name, was a stand-up for about 10, 12 years, did extremely well. Is retired now, living in Boston. But he actually lived in Sacramento for years. I have family in Sacramento for years and years and years. I think now this is the first year I don't have one relative in Sacramento.
Well, I heard there was a party going on downtown. Maybe that was why.
Yeah, that's probably it. Seriously, I had 3 brothers and a couple of in-laws and a niece and nephew. And, actually, I take that back. My nephew lives close. My nephew works for Intel and works outside Sacramento.
Oh, right. That's just east of us. Yeah. Well, that's a great connection to Northern California. And I think it's fascinating that you're able to share with the audience that as a young child or as a young adult, you had aspirations. You were brought up in a creative environment, a family that supported that, which can be so important. And music is what was your original hook to get into show business. And through the story you've already shared with the audience, and thank you for that, that morphed into so much success and so much diversity in this business we call show that you've really had such a full career in giving back in so many ways. I'm sure many of your clients are appreciative that you were there to guide them.
How much do you know about actors?
Yeah. Okay, so they're maybe not all as appreciative as you should be.
No.
But
I'm joking around. Listen, it's always even as a manager, I ask this question sometimes. What are you going to do for me next? I mean, that is kind of typically most actors, most comedians, they can only think as far as the job they're working now. Even the successful actors that I know, they finish a job and they think, oh my God, I'm unemployed. It's just the mentality of it. And so dealing with that neuroses has become second nature to me. I never really thought of it like that, but that's really what it is.
Well,
and I'm still at it. I still have like one of my. I have a partner actually. My company is now called Hassman Tolstonog Entertainment. Fran Tolstonog was an agent with two of the biggest agencies around for years and years and years and years. And when all the agencies started, and we had a couple of mutual clients for over 20 years. We were friends. She was their agent. I was their manager, and we worked together perfectly. She, about 8 years ago, when all the agencies started merging, I said to her, "You've always acted like a manager. You don't act like an agent. Your clients think of you that way. They call you on the weekend to ask you personal advice. That's not what people do with their agents mostly. Why don't you come throw in with me?" And one of the people she brought over was Christopher Knight, the oldest Brady brother.
Right.
And 4 or 5 years ago, the year before the pandemic, Home and Garden did that project where they got all the Bradys back. The house that was used as the facade when you drove up to the Brady house on the TV show,
Right.
that house was up for sale. Now, the inside of the house didn't look anything like the Brady house, but the outside of the house was the house you saw at the opening and closing of every show. So Home and Garden TV had this amazing idea. Let's get all the Bradys together and let's buy that house and redo the inside of the house to look like the TV show. And the HGTV special of the Brady renovation is still the number one basic cable show ever.
Wow.
And so for the 4 years since then, we've been getting crazy calls. You know, could we get the Bradys back together? Can we do this? And I can't say a whole lot about it because it's mostly still secretive, but it's not secret that, yes, the Bradys are getting back together. And yes, there will be a new Brady show coming up. And this is all thanks to the amazing work of my partner, Fran. And it's a go. There's a network involved. They're waiting for approved scripts right now. They've hired a showrunner. There will be another Brady show coming up.
Everybody, you heard it there. It's a show business scoop. Well,
you got a scoop. I debated doing this morning, but I put a note down at the bottom. If this goes well, talk about Brady. So that's all I'm going to talk about.
Well,
we got a deal. There's something going. But I'm also doing something with Jamie. Jamie and I are out shopping a show, a concept of Jamie's. And we're getting unbelievable feedback right now on it because
great.
It's a unique idea. So I'm not completely retired. I don't know what I would do if I was retired.
Well,
The job's always been pleasure for me. I don't go to a club or something to see comics and think of it as work.
Right. And we want to explain to the audience, when you mentioned Jamie, you're talking about our good mutual friend, Jamie Alcroft, who was part of the comedy team, very successful comedy team, Mac and Jamie. And Jamie's gone on to be a silversmith and a writer. He has a book out, The Tin Man, and The Diaries of a Tin Man, and a very talented guy, very naturally funny. And it's so funny that you went into that aspect, Neil, because when we met last time, you made it clear that you were retired, you were done with the business, you'd had a long, full life with a lot of success and diversity, and you'd hit every goal that you wanted. And one of my questions is, what's next? Is any creative idea going to tap you on the shoulder and pull you back in? And here, you've already answered that.
Yep. And leave it to. I think after that day, both Jamie and Bob both approached me with things.
Oh, funny. Well, that'll...
Which is great because I can't think of anything I'd rather do right now than work with my friends.
Exactly. And it's similar to why I do this podcast, Neil, is that I really appreciated and enjoyed my years on the fringe of show business and producing shows and working with the comics. And
Scott, you were not on the fringe of show business, man. You were deep in the chest of it. I said this right at the beginning. The comics who were the road warriors, who were successful at doing shows in places like yours on the road, are the guys that lasted. And that was because of people like you. So...
Well, thank you for saying that. And what I was going to share was that my wife and I always talk about as we reminisce about the past is what we miss were the interactions with the talent, the people. We miss the people of the industry. And what's great about this podcast is I've been able to bring it all back around and reshare moments with these old friends. To me, they were friends, and do this podcast. So getting a chance to meet you, Neil, through Jamie and Bob Duback was a real treat for the roundtable we did. And the fact that you have taken time out of your valuable day to share with my audience this amazing set of stories and information about what it's like to be a manager in show business I'm just so appreciative. Thank you so much. And meeting and getting a chance to talk to you has been such a joy.
I thought I was going to hate this. I enjoyed this very much. I don't like talking about myself. I really don't like talking about myself, but I was able to make this more about my business than about myself. So this was really good. And honest to God, if one guy who's just starting out heard one thing from this that he thinks will help him, I'm thrilled that I did it.
Well, I'm sure there's many tidbits of information in this interview. You've been very open and sharing, and thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil has not retired. Hassman Entertainment. I have trouble with your partner's name. Would you share the name of the company?
Yeah, Hassman Tolstonog Entertainment. And it's, let's see, HASTOLENT.com. So you can do submissions, or you can do Neil at HASTOLENT.com.
And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, he takes himself very serious because the name of his company is A Personal Management Joint.
Joint. It's funny. I got that firsthand from Spike. I met Spike Lee once, and we were talking about, hey, what's the name of your company? I said Hassman Entertainment, Hassman Tolstonog Entertainment, or Hassman whatever it was, Entertainment at the time. He goes, oh, man, don't you know it's hip to call your company a joint? So from that day on, it was always Hassman Tolstonog, A Personal Management Joint. I never thought about it again.
Oh, that's so funny.
When Spike Lee tells you to do something, you do it.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, get a chance. If you have any interest in show business and have some talent, don't be shy. Reach out to Neil Hassman. He is the manager to the comedy stars, and we were just so blessed to have him on the show today. Neil, continued success. We'll be looking for the Brady Project. That's a little hush-hush right now. And we will hopefully stay connected and stay friends. Thank you so much for your time today.
We will, Scott, and you're more than welcome. This was a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Next week, another great show of stand-up comedy. Your host and MC. Have a great day.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, Your Host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.